Good evening and welcome to another episode of ShireTV. I'm James Cleveland.
And I'm Darrell W. Perry. The Washington Post recently reported on the monthly boom-bust cycle that has supposedly kept Woonsocket, Rhode Island afloat for the last several years after the closure of the local textile mills. Eli Saslow reports at precisely 1 second after midnight on March 1st, Woonsocket would experience its monthly financial windfall, nearly $2 million from the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP, formerly known as food stamps. Federal money would be electronically transferred to the broke residents of a nearly bankrupt town, where it would flow first into grocery stores and then onto food companies, employees, and banks, beginning the monthly cycle that has helped Woonsocket survive. The local unemployment rate was 12%. The shuttered textile mills along the river had become Section 8 housing. The median income had dropped by $10,000 in the last decade. The Post claims this cycle is happening across the country for two reasons. One, so many people are forced to rely on government support, and two, the government is forced to support so many people. Saslow reports on the grocer Miguel Picardo in the town who relies on customers using food stamps to keep his business open, with up to 25% of his profits happening on the first day of every month, and 3/4 of his sales were to people using EBT cards. Some would say this is why governments need to provide welfare. I say this explains why they should not.
Hey, another step towards becoming a food stamp nation. Rhode Island, the smallest state in the union, according to Steve, is the home of the nation's highest unemployment, with 17% of its citizens on food stamps, a rate that's more than doubled that in the last 6 years. So is this a small look at our country's future of dependency, or just looking at a small state?
Hey, Stuart Varney.
Yeah, you asked the question, is this a picture of the future? And the answer is yes, if the economy doesn't improve, if President Obama's policies continue to fail to create enormous numbers of new jobs. Yes, that is the picture of the future. Remember, we're still signing up 3,500 people every single day onto the food stamp program. It has doubled in 4 years to a cost of $78 billion a year. Now zero in on Rhode Island. 6 years ago, 73,000 people on food stamps in that state. Now 180,000 in that state. This is the way of the future, and it's very difficult to reform it, trim it, or rein it in.
Well, on your program over on Fox Business, you talked to the mayor of Woonsocket, Rhode Island, which extraordinarily, a third of the people in that entire city, a third, are on food stamps. And what's happened now, the cycle of dependency, first the people were relying on the food stamps, and now the businesses rely on the people with the food stamps. So without the food stamps, the businesses would go belly up.
The mayor of Woonsocket is Leo Fontaine. He told me that on the 1st of every month, the food stamp cards, the SNAP cards, are loaded up with government money. So the people on food stamps go straight to the stores, and in 24 hours, the food stores, the grocery stores, they do approximately a quarter to a third of their business for the entire month. So they staff up with a lot of extra people, and that means that the entire town is dependent upon the food stamp program. 1/3 of the inhabitants on food stamps, the businesses dependent upon that loading up of the SNAP cards. The whole town relies on food stamps.
New England wasn't inordinately hit by the recession, and it's not been slowed necessarily, been slower than the rest of the nation with in the recovery. What's the problem in Rhode Island?
Rhode Island is in particularly bad shape, 9.8% unemployment, highest in the nation, along with California. Rhode Island has the problem of government-state finances. Essentially, without putting too fine a point on it, Rhode Island is bankrupt. They are insolvent, and they've had to cut back at the local state level dramatically, and there's no new industry going in there, so you've got a high unemployment rate and this dependency on food stamps.
And Stuart, Rhode Island is a very liberal state. We know that. We've talked about that before, but also
they don't want to celebrate Christmas, remember?
Well, they want to celebrate Christmas. They just don't want to have Christmas trees in the governor's mansion. But you were telling me about when you apply for a SNAP card, what do they do?
Well, the mayor of Woonsocket, Leo Fontaine, is on her. He's held up the food stamp application forms, and he went through it. He showed him, this is what you get when you apply for food stamps. And then he turned to the back of the package of papers. There is a voter registration form.
Of course.
So you sign up to vote at the same time you sign
Beautiful.
up for your food stamps, and you are encouraged thereby, I believe, to go out and vote for the party, vote for the politician that continues the food stamp program.
Absolutely.
It's a
Dependency.
complete circle, the
That's what it
circle
is.
of life.
Now, I'm not a fan of Fox News because they definitely put off an agenda that is not in line with my beliefs. But they hit on some points there that really do make a lot of sense. That it's government policies that create these problems to begin with.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, they were saying that businesses, there's no new industries coming to Rhode Island, and that's totally because of the government regulations and rules. Like, why would you want to open a business there?
Right, and the government policies wind up hurting the poorer people the hardest. When you have the minimum wage laws that prevent basically underskilled people from working for slightly less than what a government thinks that they ought to work for, and then you have the business license regulations and other sorts of business regulations that prevent people from becoming self-employed and self-reliant. Those things hurt the poor the hardest because it's the poor people that need the innovation the most. I'm sure that of the 12% that are unemployed, a lot of those people could provide daycare, work on people's cars, or provide some other service, but they're prevented from doing so because of the regulations that are in place to basically keep out small businesses, and that winds up hurting the poorer people the hardest.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they make the determination like, well, why should I get a job and work when I can sign up for the benefits and get almost as much money and not have to do any work, or I could work under the table.
And then if you do get a job, then your benefits wind up being cut, so it's actually like you took a pay cut by going to work.
Yeah, and I actually worked with a receptionist who was a single mother, and she was on welfare in Vermont. And when she took the job, her benefits got cut, and then she had to pay for daycare on top of that because she was working now. So it was a net loss to her working. So she was contemplating going back on the system.
Right, and there's a lot of people that think that libertarians want to take away the safety net for people, and that's not, at least, that's not what I support. I believe that there should be a safety net. But the safety net should not be run by the same group of people that push you down, causing you to need the safety net to begin with.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, I contribute, a little bit of donations to 100 Nights here in town, and I totally support the philosophy that Don Primrose has, like, hey, I'm going to provide this service, but I also want to incentivize people not to remain on it. I want them to get jobs and, reintegrate into society. So
yeah, and the benefits that were given out by the fraternal organizations that used to provide basically social welfare to people before, right around the Great Depression, they would provide that safety net and the hand up, not a hand out, and they would encourage people to get back up on their feet. It wasn't this permanent handout to basically keep you down in that spot and dependent upon someone else.
yeah, and social workers are good people, but they want you to stay on the program so they'll still have a job.
Yeah, they're the ones that benefit.
The New Hampshire House recently passed a bill to allow medicinal usage of cannabis. The bill was watered down to only allow individuals with a small number of diseases or disorders to obtain a prescription, and only if they also have other symptoms that have not been helped by traditional medicine for longer than 3 months, or for which other treatment options produced serious side effects.
Medical cannabis legislation has passed both houses of the New Hampshire legislature in the past. However, the previous legislation was vetoed by former Governor John Lynch. While campaigning, Maggie Hassan stated that she supported legalizing cannabis for medicinal purposes. Dave Ridley confronted one of the drug warriors from the New Hampshire Medical Society who helped water down the legislation.
Our legislative committee feels very strongly about this. The word "or" is just a huge loophole for abuse. That's what it is. It's if you put "or" in there, and I walk in to one of these clinics like my daughter's had to experience in Venice, California, and say, "Oh boy, I've had a bad back for 6 months," and you establish that relationship, and you can snow somebody because pain is somewhat subjective, then you can have access to this. It certainly is opening the door for recreational use. That's why our physicians feel very, very strongly that the word "and" versus "or" is a very, very big deal in this bill. Janet, I don't know if you have anything to share.
That's the most important.
I don't know if the board has anything to share.
Most important thing you said.
I have something to say on this. Because of my stroke, I have seizures, grand mal seizures. And if that "and" is in there, I can't get, if I decided to get marijuana, I can't get marijuana. Because I don't have cancer.
Right, it would be.
Every time I have a grand mal seizure, it causes brain damage. What are you going to do about that? What do you say about that?
What I would say about that is I'm not sure, our physicians haven't seen any science on the medical efficacy of cannabis. And so looking at this shortened list is a way to begin that process and help understand it.
Are you going to say that I have got to get cancer and not seizures to get marijuana?
Yes. Cancer,
I agree with that.
HIV, hepatitis C, the conditions that are listed there.
All right, one more. I don't want this to break down into an argument, so let's hear you, and then we're going to hear you, and then we're going to move up this issue. Mr. Chairman.
You just said what? What were you saying? You don't want to be filmed? Oh, I see. John.
What I was going to
Could you stop filming, please? I'm not a public.
I have some questions for you, and I'm getting some shots. Now, I am standing far enough away so that I can't hear you, but in a minute I'm going to ask you some questions.
But anyway, James, what I was going to say.
On behalf
Sorry, you know what? Sorry, I didn't realize you're press. I thought you were like
Oh, I see.
somebody from the marijuana.
Well, I have some questions for you.
Can I have
Okay, well, I can ask you while we're going in that direction. Why does the New Hampshire Medical Society, it sounds like they're testifying in there against very slight changes in the law that would allow people a little more access to marijuana as a medical drug. Well, it sounds like you're testifying, it sounds like you're trying to stop this slight change in the marijuana law that would allow medical marijuana. Is that true?
No, we're opposed to the bill.
Why? You don't want your patients to have more access to...
Can I give, I have to go sign in the bill. I'll come right up.
Are you going to talk to me later?
Yeah, no, I just have to sign in.
I don't want to get in the way of the
Oh, no,
stuff.
thanks.
Can we talk now? Can I email you Dr. Savage's statement?
No, I'd rather talk to someone in front of me. Email doesn't do me any good. I'm a videographer, not an emailer.
Who are you working
It's
for?
Dave Ridley with RidleyReport.com. It's a poor man's TV station out of Bedford. Oh, okay, thanks.
I don't,
Yeah.
because I would prefer that you talk to a physician and not to me.
Well,
Because there
so
is.
you're not a care provider yourself. Well, I mean, my concern though is that your organization, which claims to, I guess, operate in, to help patients, you're up there testifying in favor of the continued initiation of force against patients. What's with that?
I guess I don't see it that way.
How can you not? I mean, the marijuana laws as they stand will put cuffs on people and put them in concrete boxes for using marijuana. You're advocating for a continuation of that against your patients? Go ahead, Lynn.
I'm so sorry. No, we're trying to make sure that people who, I can't say benefit from it because that's not how we look at it, but so you don't allow easy access to people who probably are truly needy.
Well, for the government to not allow means for the government to put people in jail. You want to continue doing that?
And that's not our focus.
But that's what you were just up there advocating, even if you don't.
I'd really prefer you have this discussion with a clinician that can give you.
You know, I'm not more of a medical perspective.
Right.
Well, I'm not. I don't know. You know, and I don't think anybody knows whether or not this. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We had our meeting last night to try to come up with a policy that then Scott and I come in here and try.
How about a Hippocratic oath above all do no harm? Have you heard that one?
Yes.
Why not try it?
Again, I prefer you to ask at this
All right. I do appreciate you speaking with me finally.
Sorry.
All right. Take care.
You're like an idiot.
Now, I generally support this legislation, but you know, the rules are very confusing and they're bad rules. And maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I have actually read the legislation, and I don't remember all of the diseases and disorders that are covered, but cancer, AIDS, HIV, multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, Crohn's, and there's a couple others that are covered. And instead of just having those, you also have to have symptoms that have lasted at least 3 months, such as nausea, severe pain, back spasms, seizures, and that has to have lasted at least 3 months and not responded to traditional prescribed medicine. Or you have symptoms that are similar that are caused from your treatment, such as basically anybody with cancer going through chemotherapy or radiation would qualify because chemotherapy and radiation cause nausea and some of these other symptoms.
Yeah, it's really sad that, I mean, if someone thinks that using marijuana could help them, we have to have rules that will prevent them from doing that. And it's interesting as well that that drug lobbyists, they're all out there lobbying against the bill and making it so terrible, because it is competition, and it's a classic case of they want to use government to limit their competition.
Right, and it's even sadder that the people from the medical society are lobbying against this. One would think that, doctors or a doctor's union would want their patients to be able to get the treatment that would actually help them and help their symptoms, and allow them, if they have nausea, allow them to not be sick all the time and actually eat and digest a meal. And there are other symptoms such as really bad headaches that can be helped from ingesting cannabis. Not smoking cannabis, but ingesting cannabis. Because there are various ways that one can get the THC out of the cannabis.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, I know there are clinics in, let's take California, where you can get, treats with cannabis in it. And some people prefer that as opposed to smoking it.
Yeah, and well, there are a couple of reasons that might be preferable. One is you're not burning something and then getting, ingesting smoke that could potentially harm your lungs. But when you smoke something, it enters your body a little differently and affects you a little differently. Cannabis in cookies or brownies is one of the few things that actually helps my permanent headache. But because of this legislation, I could not get a prescription from a doctor to help with the headaches that I have from post-concussion syndrome or the arthritis that I have because I have no cartilage in my knees. So the New Hampshire Medical Society basically wants to prevent me from using the medicine of my choice that helps with some symptoms that I have.
Yeah, and that's really sad that they would choose to do that. Reuters reports the Republic of Cyprus clinched a last-ditch deal with international lenders to shut down its second largest bank and inflict heavy losses on uninsured depositors, including wealthy Russians, in return for a 10 billion euro, that's $12.9 billion bailout. The agreement came hours before a deadline to avert a collapse of the banking system and fraught negotiations between the president of Cyprus and the heads of the European Union, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. Without a deal, Cyprus' banking system would have collapsed and the country could have become the first to crash out of the European single currency.
Deposits below 100,000 euro in the popular Bank of Cyprus, also known as Laiki, will be moved to the Bank of Cyprus to create a good bank. Deposits above 100,000 euros in both banks, which are not guaranteed under EU law, will be frozen and used to resolve Laiki's debts and capitalize the Bank of Cyprus through a deposit equity conversion. Laiki will effectively be shuttered with thousands of job losses. Officials said senior bondholders in Laiki will be wiped out and those in Bank of Cyprus would have to make a contribution. An EU spokesman said no across-the-board levy or tax would be imposed on deposits in Cypriot banks, although the hit on large account holders in the two biggest banks is likely to be far greater than initially planned. The raid on uninsured Laiki depositors is expected to raise 4.2 billion euros.
Cyprus has managed to reach a last-minute deal with its creditors on a 10 billion euro bailout, ultimately crucial to preventing the country from falling into bankruptcy. The rescue package, however, comes at a steep price. Deposits over 100,000 euros in the country's two largest banks will be raided. They're looking at about hacking 30% in taxes. Let's get the details now. RT's Tessa Arcilia standing by for us live right now in Nicosia. And Tessa, it's good to see you today. Let's talk about this now. The deal has been reached. Do you think Cyprus is now out of the darkness?
Well, let's just say that it has averted today that technical bankruptcy, but it is certainly not out of the woods. This is going to be a long process of restructuring, of having to look at finances from the very beginning. Let's look at the actual deal. So what they agreed upon in Brussels is that the Laiki Bank, now that is the Popular Bank of Cyprus, it's the second largest lender of the country, will essentially be split into two, now creating that good bank, bad bank. So what will happen is those depositors with less than 100,000 euros in the bank will be transferred to the Bank of Cyprus, that is the biggest lender of the country, and essentially creating that good bank. Now the others with more than 100,000 euros of uninsured deposits, those that are not covered under EU guarantees, EU laws, would be taking a huge loss, very significant loss. And this will really hurt those with, of course, their life savings, or those with the small to medium-sized enterprises with money in the bank. So they will be taking a big loss, and essentially Laiki Bank will be shut down, and this will essentially result in jobs lost, and that is what some hundreds of people have already been protesting here. Okay, and then aside from that splitting of the bank of Cyprus will also be absorbing the other bad debts of Laiki Bank. So the Bank of Cyprus itself, the biggest lender, is not out of the woods as well now, because it will be absorbing some of the toxic assets. Also, let's remember that there are still capital controls in place, which means that banks can still impose restrictions on the amount of money that citizens can take from the ATMs, or the amount of money they can move around, and this is really creating a credit crunch, a cash crunch. Everybody trying to hold on to those 5-10 euros that they have, just in case there's even lower limits, because right now they can only take about 100 euros left, and so that's where it stands right now. And also the creation of the Solidarity Fund. So a lot of details still coming. Again, as I said, this is still a long process. They've agreed generally getting that 10 billion euro bailout. And one more thing I'd like to add lastly is that this raid, as some would call call on the deposits of those big deposits will create about 4.2 billion euros. Let's not forget, the IMF and the Troika wanted 5.8 billion euros. So they may still impose raises on taxes on citizens in order to make up for that differences that they still lack.
So you're talking about still at least $1 billion short there. You talk about the possibility of raising taxes on this as people's savings accounts are getting pilfered. Now the banks are saying to people you can only pull out a certain small amount from your banks every day. So the people are really in a tough position. And all the while, Tessa, I hear the Cypriot president saying that people will be pleased with the news. Well, are they? Do you think they're buying it?
Well, first of all, they have to go through that very technical explanation that I had just given to you. And frankly, the reaction here is definitely not one of pleasure, of welcoming this deal. They're very frustrated, still very disappointed. Let's not forget that as this unfolded a week ago, the feeling of the people here is that a red line has been crossed. Remember the suggestion that they will be dipping into the savings of even those small deposit holders. This has really sent a very bad message to people. They've lost confidence, they've lost trust in whatever the government or the Troika presents to them. They're just really worried. Will I have cash? Will I have a job? Will I have savings? And these questions for them are not answered by this very technical deal that their government has agreed with the Troika.
All right, Artiza, Tessa Arsilia there live in Nicosia. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you enjoyed the show. As always, if there's a story you'd like us to cover, or perhaps you'd like to make a guest appearance on the show yourself, please drop us an email at news@shiretv.org.
Tune in next week for another episode of Shire TV for more news and analysis. I'm Darrell W. Perry.
And I'm James Cleveland. May you each find happiness, peace, and prosperity.